بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Welcome to you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our second session, inshallah, we'll do our best to answer your questions. If we have the answer now, we'll share it with you, and if we don't, we'll say so, and we'll get back to it as appropriate, inshallah. The thing with questions is that in a public setting like this, on a public forum, some types of questions and answers are immensely beneficial, but others can lead to a degree of misunderstanding or confusion, especially when the answer is specific to a specific circumstance, but the listeners consider the answer to be generic and general and assume that it suits their own circumstances as well. Not very different from a medical scenario in which, because one patient is helped, anecdotal evidence, the other patient assumes that they can take that prescription themselves. It's very important to ensure that the answer is suited to our own circumstances as well. And that's why sometimes the advice is that come back with the question to us personally, through email, through phone, etc., or when it's possible in person, so that the question can be answered based on your own circumstances. So with this short intro, let us inshallah, let us do bismillah, let us initiate and look at what we have today, inshallah. Ji.
The first question we have is, what year did Ramadan start?
What year did Ramadan start? Presumably this is a question about the obligation of fasting in Ramadan. The month of Ramadan, the name precedes the obligation of fasting in Ramadan. If we look at the Mufassirin, the tafsir of the verse in which Allah obliged us to fast, various narrations mention this point. And generally, the understood opinion, the accepted opinion, is that fasting became an obligation in the second year of Hijri. Before this, the 10th of Ashura in Muharram, this was the obligatory fast. And some narrations mention 3 fasts every month as well. There has always been a form of fasting in Islam and before Islam. And after this, in the second year of Hijri, which that year was the same Ramadan in which the Ghazwa of Badr happened, the 17th in fact, and that was a Jummah. This is when the Ghazwa of Badr happened. So just before Ramadan started, some days, weeks prior to this, the obligation came that you must fast in the month of Ramadan. And this abrogated the obligation of fasting on the 10th of Muharram, and fasting in Ramadan for the full month became a permanent obligation. Ji.
What would be your recommendation in respect to Travie, considering we are not allowed to congregate at mosque?
What recommendation regarding Travie as we can't congregate in the masjid? This is a question we've addressed in a clip that you can follow up. It went out yesterday about Travie prayer specifically. But in brief, the Travie prayer, just like the other congregational prayers, doesn't have to be in a masjid. Just as you don't have to perform your 5 times daily prayer in a masjid, it's valid to have the congregation elsewhere. Similarly, it's totally valid to have the congregation of Travie at home, where this is possible. So where there is someone who can lead and someone at least who can follow, at least 2 people, then there's no reason why Travie shouldn't happen in the house. And let us remember that there are 2 separate sunnahs, 2 aspects to this sunnah, if you like. One is the 20 rakats of Travie prayer, and this is something, as I've mentioned earlier in that piece that you can follow up as well, this is something which actually was initiated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The 20 rakats, the number of rakats the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed, there are various narrations. How many did he perform? There is a number of narrations relating to this. And the narration of Aisha relating to tahajjud in Ramadan and outside of Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ's 8 rakats, this is relating to tahajjud prayer. So the 3 nights in which the Prophet ﷺ led the Sahaba in prayer, this forms the foundation. And what actually happened subsequently, the Prophet ﷺ didn't continue this lest it become a wajib on the ummah. In other words, if the Prophet ﷺ had done it continuously, Allah Azza wa Jal may have obliged the ummah to follow suit. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't, he did it for 2-3 nights to show its preference. And then he stopped to do this. But the Sahaba continued their ibadah during the nights in the time of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu and in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu. And Sayyidina Umar saw in the masjid that there are various small congregations in which the Sahaba are performing their nighttime nafal and sunnah, and he just gathered them behind a single Imam, Ubay bin Ka'b radiyallahu anhu. And then this continued into the Khilafah of Uthman, so you can't just attribute it to Umar radiyallahu anhu. And this was ratified by him. He let it continue in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a community only of Sahaba and Tabi'in. And then Khairul Qurun, the best of eras. Then it continued in the era of Ali radiyallahu anhu. In fact, when he saw the masjids full in Ramadan, he supplicated to Allah, "Oh Allah, fill the grave and qabr of Umar with nur as he has filled our masjids." It continued in the Khilafah of Sayyidina Hassan radiyallahu anhu during the era of Amir Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu till this day. So we can continue this sunnah in our house. So there's 2 aspects to it. One is the 20 rakats and the other is the completion of the Quran. If you don't know the whole Quran, just recite as much as you can. And if there is no one that can lead or there's no one to follow, then just perform your 20 rakats on your own. And by the way, in tahajjud prayer and in nighttime prayer, and this includes the Travie prayer, even if you are reading on your own, it's preferred that you recite a little aloud with a voice, not completely silently. You can perform silently when you're on your own, it's preferred to read aloud. So fill your house with the hum and buzz of tilawah during the night. So I hope this explains the question. How do you perform Travie prayer? Just as you would in the masjid, lead yourself, or if you have a member of the family, perhaps one of your children who's baligh, who's reached the age of puberty, then let them lead and be confident about this. And what I mean by this is some people panic if they get stuck. I addressed this earlier as well. So if you miss a verse, then read from the bit that you know, go into ruku and then make up in the next 2 rakats and revise what you know during the day and increase what you know, and try to complete the quantity of Quran that you would normally recite, even if you're not a full hafiz. So this may mean repeating surahs, reciting the same juz twice, half juz twice, or reciting the same juz every day. And in this way, we can all perform Travie in our houses. And where you're on your own, just perform this on your own. And sisters can join the congregation, or they can perform the Travie prayer on their own, in which they recite the amount that they know silently. Ji.
Just a follow-on question
Mhm.
on that. What is the best tip to get the best reward from Travie at home?
Best tip to get the best reward from Travie at home. To get the best reward, there are 2 aspects of salah. And there's 2 parts to the question. Getting the best reward from Travie at home. So in general, there's two aspects to salah. There's the outward rulings and there's the inner rulings. There's the outward khushu and there's the inner khushu. In terms of the outward rulings, it is the prerequisites of salah, the sharait, and the arkan of salah, the parts, the essential parts of salah, and the sunan and adab and etiquettes. So the prerequisites include, there are 7. The body should be pure, the clothing should be pure and tahir, pak. The ground should be pure on which we are performing salah. That's why we tend to put down something on the floor if we're not sure. So that's 3. Then we should be facing the qibla. It should be a valid time to perform that salah. 5, the niyyah before salah. 6, and which one am I missing? The takbir-e-tahrima, to make the niyyah at that time. So we have the purity of the place, the purity of the body, the purity of the clothing, facing the qibla, the appropriate time, the niyyah, making the intention. I'm missing one. If it comes to me, I'll mention, but it's general knowledge. I'm missing one. So then when we say Allahu Akbar, there's the qiyam, there's the ruku, there's the sajda, there's sitting in at-tahiyyat and tashahud. Each one of these needs to be done properly. Sometimes people go into ruku and they don't properly bow down. And then they're up, and before they stand, they're on their way to sajda. That shouldn't happen. So do the ruku properly, in which the back should be flat, the head should be flat as much as possible, knees should be straight. And then stand up and stay in that position for a moment. stay in that position. Sometimes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would spend entire nights in just ruku or sajda. And the sunnah is also described as the Prophet ﷺ's own personal prayer, such that the ruku and the sajda is just like the length of the qiyam. Now you won't do this in congregational prayer, because in congregational prayer you need to keep in mind the convenience of all those around you and behind you. But on your own you can do this. So the point I'm making right now is do the ruku properly, and then stand up, qawma, properly, straight, and stay there for a moment. And then Rabbana lakal hamd, and you can increase hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi mubarakan ali, and then go into sajda and rest on the ground. 7 parts: the feet, the knees, the hands, and the face, and the forehead and nose, the face. That's 7 parts. Stay in that position. And the 3 Subhana Rabbiyal A'la are the minimum. It can be longer. So the one aspect is to perform the salah peacefully, not rushing to the degree that we're not in any particular position for a proper amount of time. So the outward etiquettes, performing all the fard and wajibs of the salah properly, the sunan, the tasbih. The inner etiquettes are essentially that we don't let other thoughts distract us. We don't talk to ourselves, as is mentioned in one hadith. A person who performs 2 rakats of prayer in which he doesn't talk to himself, hadithun nafs, he doesn't talk to himself, his sins will be forgiven. Any 2 rakats, if you can maintain this from Allahu Akbar to the Salam. Maintain this state. Don't talk to yourself. Now, there's a difference of opinion here in the commentary of this hadith, and it's a sahih narration. What about the thoughts which come uninvited? Do they count or not? There's both opinions. As long as the thought which comes uninvited you don't entertain it. Think of a visitor. They pop up on your screen. What do? You just cancel it. You don't entertain it. You don't click and open something which is unwarranted and uninvited. Similarly, in salah, the uninvited opinion, if we start interacting with it, this is hadithun nafs, this is talking to ourselves. But if we ignore it and continue, then we've evaded this distraction. And this is something we ought to practice constantly. So, preparing for salah properly, ensuring that our body is pure, our clothing is pure, and the ground on which we're performing salah is pure, and that it's the appropriate time, it's not a makruh time, we don't miss our salah, and then we make the intention, we're facing the qibla, all of the prerequisites of the salah. And then inside salah, concentrating as much as possible. In addition to all of this, some tips here. What is it that distracts us? On one occasion, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was wearing a garment in salah which had some pattern on it, and it distracted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in salah. Rasulullah did not appreciate that distraction, and he didn't wear it after salah. So what about us? What distracts us? This is why anything which distracts us in salah and it's in our control, we are meant to make a point of evading it, ensuring it's not there. Otherwise our salah will become makruh, to the extent that this is why if the food is ready, to eat a few morsels and then perform salah is better than performing salah and thinking of your food. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, I prefer that my food becomes my salah rather than my salah becoming my food. And what he meant by that is, I don't want to be dreaming of food during salah. It's better that I eat a few morsels and then go into salah. And this is why iftari time, don't have the whole meal if it's going to take half an hour and 20 minutes and delay the maghrib unnecessarily, but have enough to satisfy you for a moment. You quickly have the few morsels which will take your mind off food so you can perform your salah properly. So this includes the phone ringing. Put it on do not disturb mode or silence it. It includes any distraction which you can possibly avoid. But of course, I have to mention here, under lockdown and with those families that have small children in the household, your salah is not more important than the children. And the Prophet ﷺ prolonged his salah when one of the grandchildren, Hassan or Hussein radiallahu anhu, climbed onto his back. He appreciated this, the child's need for this moment. He didn't throw him off. So it doesn't mean that if our salah is being disrupted because we have small children in the house, we fly off the handle. Small children ought to be given love and attention and brought to that realization gradually, so that they are mature enough to understand that when someone is performing salah in the house, they don't disturb. So I don't want to sort of prolong this unnecessarily, but the general point is, if we work on our external and internal, if we properly focus on our salah before salah time, prepare in good time, and make this important. I'm mentioning this because this is a big part of Ramadan. Fix the times, lay out something on the floor, if that's what we're going to do, in advance, to create the environment of salah. So that everybody knows at this time we're going to be performing Travie prayer, at this time we're going to be performing Maghrib prayer. Have a timetable in the house and take away the distractions and then launch yourself and immerse yourself, inshallah. Allah accept our efforts, inshallah.
I live at home with my wife and 2 daughters. Is it possible for us to read Travie together with myself leading the prayer and my wife and daughter standing in line behind me? Or should they pray alone?
I live at home with my wife and 2 daughters. Can they join me in prayer, or should they read alone? They can most certainly join you, and the manner in which you will lead them in prayer is that they will stand one saf behind you. They won't stand just right beside you. They stand one complete saf behind you. Not 2 safs, 1 saf behind you. If there was a male saf, then there'd be that saf and then their saf. Otherwise, they'll be just, what do you say, 4 feet behind you in a line. And absolutely you can lead them in congregational prayer. You can lead small children in congregation prayer as well, and it will increase the reward, and we ought to do that. So you would say the iqamah yourself, and then you would say Allahu Akbar, and you would complete the salah in this fashion. Now,
in regards to ehtekaf, as the lockdown will continue for many weeks, to attain the reward of ehtekaf, will men get the reward of seclusion if it's done in the house? Also, will men have to be confined to one room of the house, as it is for females?
So the summary of the question is, can men perform ehtekaf in the house, and will they get the same reward and as females can, and would they have to be secluded in one place? Ehtekaf for men is in the masjid, and the exception for sisters in Hanafi fiqh is only for sisters. So keep this point in mind. So the sunnah ehtekaf of Ramadan, which is sunnah mu'akkada ala al-kifaya, it's a continuous sunnah which the Prophet ﷺ did almost every single year after Hijrah. This is in the masjid, and the fiqhi texts are clear about this point, that the masjid is one of the conditions. Having said this, to devote time for spiritual purification and ibadah, in which you isolate yourself, not calling it the ritual and technical i'tikaf, not calling it that, but secluding for this purpose, is a practice of the Salaf through the centuries. Indeed, we can even trace the origin of this back to the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wassalam did his 30 plus 10, 40 days, his miqat near Mount Sinai. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam spent time in the Ghar of Hira, Jabal Nur, and he would go there and he would spend prolonged amounts of time in seclusion, worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is, as I say, something which the mashayikh have done for centuries in Islam. So while we don't call this i'tikaf in the formal sense, to isolate for your benefit, for your own benefit, and sit in seclusion and devote all or much of your time exclusively to worship when it's not at the expense of your obligations towards others, of course this is commendable, and it's the best way of spending Ramadan. In any situation, if you can't do i'tikaf in the masjid, in fact, at one level, for some people, it might even be better. And I'm not saying, and I reiterate again, I'm not saying this is the sunnah i'tikaf in the masjid, but from a different angle, I'm coming from a different angle. Sometimes, when we do i'tikaf in big congregations, the congregation, the people we know, can become a distraction. Talking to them, interacting with them. Subhanallah, for those who love isolation, for worship, this is a blessing in disguise. To be on your own, and as I again reiterate the other point I made, as long as this isn't at the expense of your obligations towards others. If you have elderly parents to look after, if your family need your support, then don't be a hands-off parent where you participate in nothing. Don't do that. Do what you need to do. If this means helping with household chores and household work, or minding the kids so that your partner can have some rest as well, all of these things need to be done. But where it's possible for you, and many are in this situation too, absolutely indulge in the luxury of free time which Allah has given you out of the blue. And for many, you don't have to take time off work to do this. And for those that do, if you're working from home or your spare time, spend that time in isolation and you will maximize the potential. As long as you don't spend all your time playing some random game on your phone, and you don't have the phone ringing all the time. Remember, if it's for worship, then it's for worship. Seclude yourself, and don't make social calls. Don't do that, and maintain that time. Maintain the momentum. Have targets in addition to your further obligations, additional salah, and perhaps any qada salah that may be remaining, and recitation and revision of Quran, meditation. Ji.
If I read Fajr at 1:33 a.m. in the summer timetable, would it be advisable to keep to this time in Ramadan or extend Sahri time as in timetable?
If I normally perform my salah according to the 1:33 time during the rest of the year, should I do Sahri at this time or should I extend my Sahri time? Well, the reason why the other option has been provided, so to speak, it's been explained to the public and they've been given that option, is because there are many in our midst who do have all sorts of scenarios where it's not easy for them to fulfill this obligation, keeping such a long fast. But for those who can, you absolutely can. There's no problem there. Just don't keep chopping and changing. The day that you are delayed, you don't use a different timetable. Be punctual with one approach. And to iterate, last week I explained this point and there's a bit of vagueness. I quickly go over this. Basically, the way we ascertain, and I'll come back to the question, the way we ascertain the time of Fajr prayer during the ordinary nights is that on the horizon you see initially a vertical ray of light, and this is known as Subh Kadhib, the false dawn. And you ignore this and Suhoor goes on and the night goes on, and then Subh Sadiq is when, Subh Sadiq, the true dawn, is when you see a horizontal spread of light on the eastern horizon. Now what happens is, in these parts of the world where we are, in the United Kingdom and in Scotland, during these summer months, that light doesn't disappear after sunset. It remains on the horizon, initially on the western horizon, and moving around, the light in the sky remains there all the way till dawn. So you don't get that twilight time in which there is no light on the horizon. And so essentially you've lost the indicators of the beginning and ending of Isha time. And so what do? There are three main approaches which have been used by the Muslims in this country over the last time around this happened, and the opinions of the fuqaha on this issue. We go back 40 years, it's a 36-year cycle, and now in these last few years as well. So it goes beyond 40 years, 50 years, 55 years. So basically, what you do is either you freeze the time, so the last visible Fajr time in the normal way after darkness is approximately 1:33 some years. There's a slight variation according to the leap cycle. And so you freeze this time, and this is known as aqrabul ayyam. You continue with this time all through the summer. The other approach is the night is divided in half when you can't see true dawn, and you divide the Fajr, Maghrib and Isha time is in the first half after sunset, and the Fajr time is in the second half, and this is approximately 1:10. It varies, so we can get you the exact time. The third approach is where you use the timing in the nearest vicinity on land where there is a true dawn, and it's in France for us, and that's the time that's been published. And so if you have, as a habit, closed your fast at the 1:30 time, this year you can continue to do that based on our advice. It's not 1:33 precisely, that's an approximation. This year we advise that you close your fast at 1:25, and then after 1:33, perhaps 1:35, 1:33ish is fine, you then perform your Fajr. So keep a few minutes gap on either side of that and you'll be fine. And you can do this for the whole length of Ramadan. Don't chop and change. And for those who don't intend to do this, stick with the other timing that is published, and don't keep chopping and changing. And the big jump in our timetable is because we moved to the time close to 1:30, and then that's when you no longer have the visible signs of the beginning and ending time of Isha. So we move to these other calculated approaches based on fiqh opinion, which are considered to be valid and accepted approaches to calculating the night. And so that's why you see this big jump. We move to the estimated time based on ijtihad. G.
Can I listen to live stream and follow the Imam in namaz prayer or Travie prayer in my own home?
Can I listen to live stream and follow the Imam in my own home? No, that's the short answer to that question, any more than you can follow the Imam in the Haram, because you need to be in the physical vicinity. Now, people say, well, what about, we use a PA system in the masajid. Yeah, but you're in the same physical space. That's the bottom line. So the simple answer is no. Congregational prayer is performed together. That's why it's congregational. And virtual togetherness is not a substitute. It's not a substitute. And the other point is, see, sometimes what happens is when we have scenarios like the one we have now, brothers and sisters, what happens is because of certain technologies that we have and certain solutions that we have in the world of technology, we quickly jump to the conclusion that, yeah, that makes sense, we can do that with that. But the jump isn't so simple. It's not always. Let us look at what the Sharia actually says. People say, ad-deenu yusrun is in hadith, and in the Quran as well, the deen is described as yusr, and people say deen is easy. Ad-deenu yusrun, deen is easy. Yeah, it is easy in the sense that by nature it's easy. But it's not, it doesn't imply that we can just jump to the nearest conclusion on something. It doesn't mean that. What it means is it's easy by nature. But this doesn't mean that in some circumstances we may have to challenge our nafs, like the fast. It's not too hard. That's why the majority of the ummah performs fasts and have done so for centuries. No harm has come to them. But there is a challenge there. Getting up fajr, it's not something which is backbreaking, but it may be difficult for some people. So on this point, let me explain, in fiqh, and this is nothing new, it's not because of the virus we're saying this, open any fiqh text of any madhab, and you will find lists of reasons when you don't have to go to the congregational prayer. One of them is illness, one of them is weather problems, like a sandstorm or intense rainfall, flooding on the streets where you have to walk to the masjid, or imminent danger. Even when you are concerned that you'll meet somebody in the congregation who it may be challenging for you to meet that person, and there's specific details there. So there are all sorts of reasons when you don't have to go to a congregational prayer. If you have infants in the house or someone's sick and you are the only person to look after them and that would compromise their safety, you would stay with them. There are all sorts of scenarios when you don't have to. So this is another scenario in which the Sharia is not even asking you to do something which is out of your means. So don't try to use technology for establishing a form of prayer which is not precedented in the ummah. Just perform congregational prayer with your household where that's possible. And where it's not, then perform prayer on your own. And when Allah gives you the opportunity, then join the congregation, inshaAllah. Ji.
Can I read 8 rakats instead of 20 for Travie?
Can I read 8 rakats instead of 20? I've already clarified that the 8 rakats which are mentioned are actually, the hadith which is used is actually the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anhu. It's in Sahih Bukhari, it's in other books of hadith. This is relating, she says clearly in the narration, she narrates the Prophet she narrates about Rasulullah that the Prophet used to perform the same inside Ramadan, outside Ramadan. That's how we know this is the tahajjud prayer. And I've already mentioned in today's session the 2 to 3 nights in which the Prophet led the Sahaba in a specific prayer. See, let us understand this point. The Prophet is the most beloved to Allah from his creation. This point needs to be understood. And the implication is everything the Prophet ﷺ said and did, even occasionally, becomes significant. And this is why, with the 4 madhabs, the 4 schools of thought, in Allah's wisdom, He kept alive different dimensions of the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah, because He loved the sunnah so much. And He loves the sunnah so much. So we have different schools of thoughts which evolved through Allah's taqdeer and takween, to preserve the Sharia from all its dimensions. And there's hikmah in that. So in a similar way, if my Nabi ﷺ did an ibadah for 2 to 3 nights, Allah ensured that stayed alive as well. And I've given you the backdrop to that in an earlier question. So perform your tahajjud of 8 rakats, but enhance that with the extra ibadah and gain the extra reward. And let me say, and by the way, no disrespect to anyone. We respect everybody's position on this. People who differ with us, we respect their position as well. Alhamdulillah. But let me be clear about this, that this is the ijma' and consensus of the Sahaba. Think about this. Let us visit, let us do some time traveling in our imagination. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu is the Khalifa. Had I the opportunity, would I stand behind him in prayer? Hands down, I would, and you would too. Everyone who's listening has got, of course you would. Now, it's the era of Umar radiallahu anhu. He ashaddun, and he was the most intense and firm when it came to deen. He didn't accept compromise in deen. Did Umar accept compromise in deen? Your heart is crying out, he didn't. Did Uthman accept compromise in deen? He gave his life away. He gave his life away. He didn't put up a fight when the rebels surrounded his house. He would recite the Quran completely all through the night. One khatam through the whole night. The mushaf he would recite from became torn because of being wear and tear. In those days it was leather. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, would he compromise? He gave his life. Sayyidina Hassan radiallahu anhu, would he compromise? Why did they continue this? Sheikh Atiyah Salim, a Maliki scholar from Medina Munawwara, and on the record you can search for his audio Arabic durus of Muwatta and other durus of hadith and tafsir, very big scholar. He wrote a book on the subject in which he linked together all the mashayikh of Mecca and Medina from the time of Umar and the Sahaba till his lifetime, which is just some years ago. And who led 20 rakats in both of the harams. It's an unbroken sunnah, and it keeps the hafiz on his tiptoes. You know how many thousands of hufaz, if not hundreds of thousands, owe the strength of their hifaz to the blessing of Travie prayer? Do we not want to keep the sunnah alive in our lives? So, my dear friend, you know, we've spent 11 months in which we've done very little perhaps with our nights. Why not use the 12th one to maximize the benefit? So what we say to you is, why stick with 8? Then there are other opinions as well. The Maliki position mentioned in Tirmidhi, it goes up to, 32? And there's some detail behind this. There's an opinion of more than 20 as well. Why not up the number? The other way to go. It's documented. See, how much time do we have? I don't want. Shall I just mention this point? Sorry? Right. So let me just summarize this. You know, so there's other opinions. So why 8? Why not go for one of the other numbers as well? So what I'm saying is, by all means, perform whatever you can. Look, inshallah, if you perform 8, Allah will give you ajr for that as well. But understand the difference, that the academic discussion on this point, that we see the Travie as a separate sunnah, and we see the tahajjud prayer as a separate sunnah. You know, let's take this discussion to another level. Just to close on this, because I want to close this on a sweeter tone. This is not something to argue about. I just want to clarify our position and invite you to joining it. You know, ultimately what matters to me and you is when we leave this dunya, Allah Ta'ala is pleased with us and we've done something with the nights of Ramadan. This is the ultimate goal. And as such, we ask Allah's forgiveness for the whole ummah and tawfiq to do the most that we possibly can. Ji.
We're getting lots of questions about Jamaat.
Right. Bismillah.
There's an example here, somebody saying, there are 2 men and 2 women in my house. How do we stand? How do you perform? There's another one saying, there are 2 men and 1 woman in my house. How do I perform? There's another one saying, there's 1 man and 2 women. So all the questions
so in difference, how do you stand as a family in salah? If you have a big room in which you can make 3 safs or more, let's begin. The Imam stands at the front. This is when you don't have a problem with space. And then the men stand, and then the children stand, and then the women and sisters stand. That's what you do. If this means that, if this means standing like this is not possible because there isn't enough space, then what we do is, for example, if there's space on both sides of the Imam, then the people standing behind the Imam, the front saf of men can move forward and they can stand 1 step behind to the right and left of the Imam. So if there's enough space for 3 safs and that's all you need, then the person who asked 2 men and 2 ladies, well, the Imam would stand, because there's only 1 man, he would stand 1 step behind from the Imam. And then the sisters would make a separate saf. If there's 2 men, the Imam would stand at the front, the 2 men or more would stand behind him, and then the sisters will stand behind them. And if there's 2 men or more, and there isn't space for 3 safs, there's ladies as well, the Imam at the front, and as I've mentioned, the others, the males next to the Imam 1 step back. If there's any children and they can't stand in a separate saf, then they can join the saf of the adults, and then the sisters will stand behind. If there's only 1 man and the rest are sisters, then it'd be the man at the front, and then the sisters will stand 1 full saf, which is 4 feet behind him in a line. And I hope that clarifies that particular point. Do you know, this is a positive. I'm seeing, subhanallah, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sallu fi buyutikum wa la tattakhiduha qubura." Now there's more than one explanation of this hadith. I'll give you one explanation. Perform salah in your houses and don't make them into graveyards. One explanation is that the 2 points are connected. The other is that the 2 are separate. If they're connected, what this means is that a house in which salah isn't performed is like a graveyard. That's the bottom line. So this is a blessing And I'm seeing, subhanAllah, may Allah accept the tawbah of the ummah. We're seeing people are being punctual. People are finding solace in salah and dua. People are finding solace in ibadah. May this continue. And this change, positive change which is happening in our households, let it continue. And by the way, for those who may be listening, the youngsters as well, don't disappear into your corners with your tablets and phones. Engage with your parents and families and do things together. And inshallah there'll be khair and barakah in that. Ji.
How would someone read Eid prayer during lockdown?
Eid prayer is similar to Jummah prayer. Now, let me clarify. There are both opinions. There are those ulama in the United Kingdom who are discouraging Jummah prayer in houses. And now, if there's a skeleton staff performing Jummah in the local masjid, then there's another mas'ala which is appropriate to know. You would do Jama'ah for Zuhr on all 6 days, but if there's a skeleton staff doing Jummah in your local masjid, you would not do Jama'ah for Dhuhr on a Friday. You would read it individually. Because you're not supposed to be doing Jama'ah of Dhuhr if Jummah is happening. And if there's no skeleton staff in the local masjid, musalla, doing Jummah, then the position is you would read Dhuhr individually just for that one day of the week. So this is based on that opinion. Based on the opinion that you can perform Jummah if you have a minimum number of people in your house, then of course you would perform the Jummah prayer. You would perform the Jummah prayer. And the Eid prayer is very similar to the Jummah prayer, so the same conditions would apply. And we'll talk more about this as we approach the Eid time, inshallah. Let's see how the circumstances are. Perhaps it will continue. Let's see. So, but it's not around the corner. So, but, shall we talk about Ramadan and then we talk about Eid as well, inshallah? Yeah, but I think I've given an idea. The point is the conditions of Eid are very similar to Jummah, and there's both opinions with reference to Jummah. Ji.
If you have a wet dream, can you still keep a rosa?
If you have a wet dream, can you still keep a rosa? Yes. If you wake up in a state of impurity, or you woke up before the suhoor, but you didn't take your ghusl before Fajr time began, then you can still and should keep your fast. You must. And you would do ghusl in that state, just being cautious. So you wouldn't be over energetic in rinsing your mouth, and you don't have to do gargara and gargle. You just rinse your mouth with water, and you don't take water into your nose so high that you swallow it, going through your nostrils. You just take it as high as this area. You don't take it into your head, the water. But yes, you would keep your fast. If a person, and I think that's sufficient for that question. Ji.
This person has natural shyness. This stops him from prohibiting people from doing evil and commanding people from doing good. He tries, but he finds it too hard. What would be your advice?
This person is naturally shy, which prevents him from advising towards good and prohibiting from evil. What's the advice? He's shy of doing amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. Now, there's some detail here. Let us define shyness in Islam. There is shyness which is the general sense. It's a sense of you feel intimidated in the presence of others. You feel reserved, reluctant to express yourself perhaps. So, nervous perhaps. So, shyness. What does shyness mean in Islam? In Islam, the word is haya. And it has a more specific meaning. The emotion of haya, what does it do? It prevents us from doing certain things, which we might otherwise do. The haya prevents us, or the shyness prevents us. In Islam, the type of haya which is a virtue is the kind which does not prevent us from doing the things which we ought to do. And I'll give you an example. Many of us may feel very self-conscious performing wudu in a public place, or performing salah in a public place. This kind of haya is not appropriate. We need to develop the confidence which is necessary to ensure that we can do what we need to do in an appropriate way. So sometimes what we are describing as shyness might be a lack of confidence, and this ought to be built up. Having said this, let me clarify too, when we talk about amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, what do we mean? Telling people to do good and telling them not to do bad, not to do wrong. Amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar need a lot of wisdom. And so sometimes the instruction for good or the prohibition is not to be done directly. And there are conditions for this. You don't give a medicine when it's going to be harmful for the patient. So, sometimes the way to tell a brother not to do something, let me give you an example. Let me give you two examples. One example, a brother is not performing salah, but he's not in the habit of performing salah. If he's in the habit of performing salah and he's being a bit lazy, say, come on bro, let's read namaz, let's read salah, depending who it is and what the situation is. You can say it in a nice way. And it will be of benefit. But on the other hand, this person has not performed salah for a long time. And if you tell them to perform salah, you might provoke an angry reaction. Well, that angry reaction, if they refuse, it's going to be bad for their deen and iman, because they're refusing to do something which they ought to do as part of their deen. So that's not the wisest approach then. The wisest approach might be a different approach completely, something which will instill love of Allah into their heart, for example, wisdom, something which may instill the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam into their heart, something indirect. If it's Ramadan, a reference to how we might use our time best in Ramadan and do some ibadah. So it depends on the circumstance. Who are you giving advice to, and what is the best way of coaxing them towards the right thing to do? The other example I give, now let's suppose a brother has never smoked in his life, he's never abused substances, he's never taken drugs, and he's in the wrong company now and you see he's susceptible, or a sister. The advice there would be to prevent them getting there. So you don't want to find yourself in a state. You can talk to them in a different way. But what if the person is already addicted? They have a problem. Now what do? It's no good telling the addict that they need to stop. It's not going to necessarily benefit them. What you need to do now is not only give them confidence so that they can trust you. Give them confidence, establish a relationship, as long as it's not going to harm you. If you're going to fall into the same trap. So many considerations. Establish a relationship in which they trust you, so they can pour their heart out to you. And then talk to them of rising up from their current situation, and then helping them to reduce the addiction, supporting them through those difficult moments. Is this going to be easy? No. So when we talk about, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, it's a big area of wisdom and knowledge. And it's something we ought to learn. So I've made 2 points here. One point is that if the shyness is because of a lack of confidence, that confidence ought to be increased and developed. And the second point is, shyness is not appreciated in Islam when it prevents us doing the things which we ought to do. Sometimes it's not shyness from an Islamic point of view, it's a lack of haya, that you don't raise the profile of something which you ought to speak out about. It can even be described in some situations as being a degree of cowardice even. And the other point is, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar require a lot of wisdom. We need to weigh everything up and use the best approach. So we're sometimes thinking, I don't have the confidence to tell this person off. You don't need to tell them off. There might be another way of doing it, a more subtle way. And of course, to close on this one, what we can all do is, with our heart, we can consider something to be right and approve it in our heart, and consider something to be wrong because it is wrong, and disprove it with our heart, and then support that person through dua. Ji.
My sister is undergoing cancer treatment and she's really sick with severe anemia. Should she fast? If not, what is the best way to give sadaqah?
My sister is undergoing cancer treatment and she's anemic. Yep. Yeah. Should she fast? And if not, what does she give as charity? So here, see, may Allah Ta'ala grant her shifa and anybody else who's ill. The rule is that if your fasting is going to aggravate or prolong, is going to worsen or prolong your illness and delay recovery time, then you don't fast at that time. And when Allah Ta'ala gives you shifa, then you fast. So if her circumstance is such, I appreciate the anemia, but it's not possible to generalize. It's based on medical advice. If a Muslim doctor who appreciates the implications on her health on the one hand and the obligation of fasting on the other can give her advice, and if such a doctor's advice is that her fasting will worsen her anemia, it may well. I'm not rejecting that point. It may well. If this is the the concern, or fasting is going to further weaken her to the degree that her resistance to the illness and her ability to take the treatment is going to be affected. All of those scenarios will mean that she does not fast at the moment. Now, with reference to the fidya, if she hopes to recover, and we make dua that she does, and she gets to a state of health, inshallah, when the cancer is clear and she can fast, then she would. If that's anticipated, then she can wait for that time. And otherwise, she can give the fidya, and then if she recovers, she will still keep the qada. And if she doesn't anticipate that, then the fidya, or she wants to give it as a precaution, the fidya of a fast is the same as sadaqatul fitr per fast. So it's charity given, it's one day's food to a person, or the money for that. And it will be given after the fast is over, actually. So basically, that would be, per fast, there'd be the fidya of one person's food, which is the equivalent of sadaqatul fitr, and it'd be sent to needy people, individuals or people you can trust to distribute it amongst them, such as a charity. Ji.
How much do you pay in fitrana if you're unable to fast during Ramadan?
Fitrana, see, it's calculated on food, which is a measure of one sa', which is a utensil, if you're watching, about this size, a cylindrical shape. It's a measure of volume. I couldn't tell you millimeters this minute. Sa'. You could check this online, or we can get that for you, inshallah. So it's a sa' of dates, or of barley, or of raisins, or it's a half a sa' of wheat, and this is converted into pounds. And the calculation, I think, this year the Central Masjid is recommending £4. Some are saying 3, some are saying 4. You can give your 4 £3. I'm keeping the option open because I want to say these are estimations based on the purchase price of these goods. Now I want to mention to you, think about it like this. If you want to give dates as fitrana, because the asal is foodstuff, the money is a Hanafi option. The Hanafi fuqaha say you can give money instead so people can purchase the food, but the actual sadaqatul fitr is food. So of the type I've mentioned, staples. So let's suppose you buy dates. Now you're aware that you can buy dates which just cost a little bit for a kilo, and you can buy ajwa dates which may cost 10 times as much for the same proportion of dates. And that's the point. What are you going to buy? So if you can afford to, up the bar and give more, and there'll be more reward. But there isn't such an obligation. So if you want to give the minimum, you can give the minimum. And that's why there's that variation. And so that's the sadaqatul fitr. And yeah, by all means, try and send it ahead of Eid so that people who are in need can receive that in time, inshallah.
I have become a Muslim and I read my Holy Quran every day and night. I have found a lot of peace in my heart. How can I confirm that I have changed my religion? I have become a Muslim and I read the Quran every day and night. I find peace in my heart. How can I confirm that I have changed my religion? First of all, Allah accept your shahada and grant you steadfastness, and grant iman to those who don't have it, and grant steadfastness to those who have. Allah grant us all steadfastness in our iman. The second point is, it's nice to hear that you are finding solace and peace in your heart from reciting the Quran. But have you converted and have you become a Muslim? There is, subhanallah, the measure of iman. What is the measure of iman? Ultimately, this is between an individual and Allah. In the dunya, we only judge by the apparent. If a person says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, they say the words of affirmation. Or we see them engaging in salah, we take that to be an indication that they are a Muslim. And we don't challenge that unless there's something to contradict it. Or they contradict it explicitly. So if there's no reason to believe otherwise, we work on the apparent. We're not obliged to look into people's hearts. That's not our role. So if a person has embraced the faith by speaking the words and believing them, then they are a Muslim. The inside story, may Allah Azza wa Jal keep our hearts pure from any level of hypocrisy and make it such that our iman is recognized in His sight, and give us steadfastness on that. So that's on that point. Reciting the Quran, I have to clarify though, if you're referring to recitation in the Arabic, that is Allah's word, and that's recitation. If you're referring to reading and studying translation, that has its virtue and benefit, but it's not the same thing. So if you can also engage in reciting the Quran, and it's, as I say, we welcome you to our community,
And we, inshallah, we look out for you, inshallah, and jazakallah for your question. And we hope that this Ramadan is one that you can also celebrate and benefit from the virtues of, inshallah. Ji.
We see a lot of different things at janazas and graves. What, in terms of the grave, actually benefits the deceased? I.e., flowers in the grave, throwing food in the grave for birds to eat from, or a tree?
So we see lots of things on graves. People throw food for birds to eat, people place flowers there, people plant things. What will actually benefit the person? Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has specifically mentioned dua for people who have passed away. He's mentioned this as sadaqah jariyah, when children pray for their parents. So this is one definite one. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ad-du'a mukhul ibadah." Dua is the essence of ibadah. It's the core and kernel. So dua is the quintessence of everything that we can do to please Allah. And when we do dua, we're actually benefiting. There's two elements to this. One is the reward of the dua, and the other is the actual thing which we are asking for. So we make dua, and the janazah is actually a salah which has been made part of the sharia for the sake of the dua in it. I mean, we look at the whole dua, salah itself. We begin with tahara and wudu and takbir, and we praise Allah, and we recite salat and salam on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then with the takbirat we make dua for the mayyit, and then we say salam. It's a prayer for dua. So dua can be done and should be done continuously for people who have passed away, number one. Number two, another ibadah which is specifically mentioned in the hadith is hajj. A person whose parents haven't done hajj, do hajj on their behalf. Absolutely, it's explicitly mentioned. That's valid, and there's no difference there. People have a difference of opinion, ulama have a difference of opinion about when you perform other activities of ibadah on behalf of someone so that they benefit from the reward. The position of Hanafi ulama and the position of Hanbali ulama as well. Hafiz ibn Qayyim rahimahullah. Others, he's mentioned that this is the opinion of the majority, and if you look at the Hanabila, the fiqh text of the Hanabila, it's explicitly mentioned actually, the recitation of Quran and other ibadat are mentioned in the commentary when it comes to people who have passed away, in janaiz, in rites of funerals. And the Hanafiya have written in their books as well. So this includes the recitation of Quran. Now, let me say to everybody, this is a world in which opinions, all sorts of opinions are shared and discussed. Let us understand that when we talk about something like this, we're not talking about shirk and kufr at all. This is not that kind of difference of opinion. There is nobody who says reciting Quran on behalf of someone is heresy. It's a difference of opinion in fiqh. I was mentioning Sheikh Atiyah Salim earlier from Medina Munawwara. He delivered a lecture in Masjid al-Nabawi al-Sharif in Medina Munawwara on this subject, and he began with this point. He said, a Maliki scholar of great standing, he said that, remember that this is an opinion in which he emphasized the point. He said this is a position, this is a ruling in which there is a difference of opinion which needs to be respected. You know how we have a difference of opinion of raf'ul yadayn? Well, there are two opinions. So those who don't take this opinion, fine, that's acceptable. But acknowledge that there is an opinion of authentic ulama in the madhabs who say that you can, and that includes recitation of the Quran, and to be precise, it includes all types of worship. You can give sadaqah on that person's behalf, you can do hajj and umrah on their behalf, you can keep nafil fast on their behalf. Any worship, give sadaqah, which is an excellent form of sadaqah jariyah. With reference to flowers, that's at a stretch. Some people, see, on one occasion, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam laid a branch on a qabr and mentioned that this would prevent the adhab on the qabr as long as the branches didn't dry. And the muhaddithin explained this to mean as long as they are moist, they continue to do tasbih, because everything does tasbih of Allah. So this may be a protection, but that was a one-off act. So it is a basis, many ulama say, that to do the same, but it's not something which is a permanent feature of janazah. Now, some people use the same basis, and some of our fuqaha have mentioned flowers in this regard as a consequence of this narration, but many have objected to this and said no, because flowers weren't mentioned there. This isn't, and flowers are not mentioned a place for tasbih, they're mentioned a place for decoration and ta'zeem, and this is a separate thing. So, should we do that? No. Well, let me give you my particular point on this, and it's a view I'd like to submit. Look, how much do you pay the florist for this sort of spread of flowers made into a pattern in which you say, with love, or love you dad, or wherever it might be, mum, or whoever it might be, you know, this whole thing, kind of thing. This goes into hundreds of pounds. Those flowers will soon wither. And even if you take the hadith, they will wither and they'll blow away, because then they won't be doing tasbih if it's as far as they remain fresh. And what are you going to do? Keep planting flowers? This isn't the sunnah of the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ to do that. It's not established that the Prophet ﷺ placed flowers ever on a grave. So why not invest those pounds, that money, into something else, into sadaqah jariyah? What will happen? See, Rasulullah ﷺ said that the grave, rawdatun min riyad al-jannah, the qabr is a garden from the gardens of Jannah, or a pit from the pits of the hellfire. Why not plant seeds inside the grave? Do you not want your near and dear one to be lying on a flower bed inside their grave, and the doors of Jannah are open, and the fragrances of Jannah are wafting into the grave, and they're being reassured from that? You don't want that for that person? Well, why place flowers on top? They're not going to benefit. That's for the people who are walking around. Why not give that money in sadaqah, so that you've planted a garden inside the qabr, you've given them some plantation in Jannah, which they will appreciate, and it will not go away. وَالْبَاقِيَاتُ الصَّالِحَاتُ خَيْرٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ. To do tasbih on their behalf, and to give sadaqah, to do anything which will be, when accepted by Allah, will be a permanent fixture of the akhirah. So the bottom line is, any act of devotion, but we don't make a ritual of this. This is one of our problems. It doesn't have to be on a fixed date, and if someone doesn't participate, they're not sinful and you can't reprimand them. That's when it becomes an innovation and a bid'ah. People can casually, optionally do whatever act of reward they wish to, and then ask Allah, make the intention and ask Allah to make that a source of reward for the person who's performing the act, and for the person who's passed away. There's both opinions. When you give the reward, you still retain it for yourself. One opinion is that you do, and the other is that it all goes to that other person. Allah grant us tawfiq. Ji.
Okay. Is it okay to pray Zuhr after first Asr Mithal? I do this due to work.
Is it okay to perform Dhuhr after the first Mithal? I do this because of work. Yes, you can. But then don't read Asr after the first Mithal as well. Then read Asr after the second. Don't use that time between the first and second Mithal to perform both. Stick with one. And you can do that. Ji. Obviously, the preferred option is to perform Dhuhr earlier, but if you have no choice, then the Hanafi position, the classic position, is that you certainly can do that. Ji.
If you were unable to fast last year, but had the intention of making up the fast, but didn't get a chance to, and are not sure about this year, is it enough to make an intention and fast later?
Sorry, repeat the question. I lost you.
If you were unable to fast last year, but had the intention to making up the fast, but didn't get a chance, and this year you're in the same situation, is it okay to make intention and fast later?
If you intended to fast last year and you weren't able to, and you made the intention of making up later, and then you're in the same situation this year, is it okay to miss the fast? The reasoning isn't clear. Let me be very clear about this. It needs to be a valid reason in Islam. So not being able to fast. Now, if a person has an illness, for example, of the sort that I've mentioned, in which fasting causes aggravation or prolongs the recovery, or they're simply in a condition in which it's not possible for them to fast, then of course they're not sinful for missing their fast, no matter how long it takes. And if they don't expect to recover, they ought to give the fidyah for those fasts. And if they expect to recover, then when they do, they would do the qada. So if this means the whole year has passed and the opportunity didn't arise, and in this Ramadan they're not able to, then that's fine, if there's a valid reason. But remember, Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned clearly in hadith that a person who misses a single fast without any illness or reason, rukhsa from the Sharia, lam yaqdi anhu sawmud dahri, the entire dahr is the age, and it's often referred to mean a person's whole life. A person fasting for their whole life would not fulfill and expiate. They wouldn't do the qada, even if they fasted for that long. You cannot gain the virtue of Ramadan missing fasts unnecessarily by making up later. So the question is, can they do the same? Of course they can if there's a valid reason. And if there isn't, then the Muslim ought to fast. Ji.
Is it makruh to place hands on thighs while doing sajda?
Is it makruh to place hands on thighs while doing sajda? It's not sunnah in sajda. It's not sunnah. And anything which isn't sunnah, doing it unnecessarily is going to be makruh. But I think the person's question, is it makruh to put hands on thighs while doing sajda? Perhaps they're meaning when lowering into sajda. So when you're going down into sajda, you do put your hands on your thighs when you're going into sajda, and that's fine.
Clarify that as well, going down into sajda.
Yeah, that's fine. That's not makruh. That's not makruh. What is not to be done? What is not to be done is that you don't place your hands on the ground to push yourself up unless you are weak and elderly or you have a knee problem which necessitates it. Otherwise, you would raise yourself without doing that, and it would be makruh to do that. Ji.
As a mother, I am finding it difficult to get respect from my older children who, due to lockdown, are at home all day and don't listen to anything I have to say. This is causing fights at home. What do you recommend?
As a mother, I'm having difficulty in
and
getting respect from my older children, and this is because it's causing fights at home, and because of because of lockdown. Yeah. Right, older children. So let us assume this is the teenage bracket. I wish I could talk to the children rather than the mother. What can I say? There's a lot here. Let us see if we can sort of briefly say this, and may Allah make it a source of benefit. There's a number of factors. So number one, we need to look at how we got here. Now we can't go back, but we do need to look at this. Is this because we have had this kind of problem before and it's been aggravated? Or is it uniquely because of lockdown? I dare say it's not uniquely because of lockdown. Children who are respectful outside of lockdown, you would expect that they might be a little grumpy at times, but there would be some respect during lockdown too. Number one. Number two, where are the influences coming from? Are these children who are locked in their rooms all day, and are they spending extraordinary amounts of time on their digital devices? Is this an influence? Number two. Number three, the general condition of family life. How much interaction is there? And how much was there before lockdown? Number four, what approach is being used in engaging with them? Now, if I can be allowed to, when there's a problem, a breakdown of relationship, throwing the book at someone is not a solution, is it? It's all very well saying to children, you ought to respect me because I'm your parent. But if that respect is already lost, the instruction is not going to benefit, and it's not going to benefit either. So what needs to happen? So if you allow me to, and these are suggestions, I may say, in addition to the dua that parents ought to make, and this dua, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, can be incorporated into your salah. The last ruku of Surah Furqan. Into your salah before salam, particularly in your sunnahs and nafals. And you can make it with your hands up before Allah. It's a powerful dua. It's to rectify spouses and children. And it's for everybody. If you want a pious spouse, a pious husband or wife, and you're not married, read the dua. If you have one and you want them to become pious, read the dua. If you don't have children, you want pious children, read the dua. If you have children, you want them to become pious, read the dua. It's a very comprehensive dua. Rabbana hablana, our Lord. Hablana min azwajina, grant us from our spouses. Wa dhurriyatina, and our offspring. Qurrata ayun, the coolness of the eyes. Which is a term in Arabic used for happiness, a source of happiness. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, and make us imams of the pious, so leaders of the pious. So give us piety and make our children follow suit, in other words, because we'll only be happy from children if they are pious too, if we ourselves are pious. So this is on the dua side, and there's much else that we can do in terms of dua. So dua should be made, and we should never curse our own children. because it might come back to haunt us later, the curse that we made. But about the advice now. And this is just advice. It's just advice. There's no single rule, and we all have to raise our children in the best way that we can. You know, if there is already a breakdown of relationship, then taunting them and telling them what they ought to be and do and is not going to work anymore. If there's a breakdown of relationship with children, with our own children, then perhaps we need to re-establish the relationship at a different level. Now we've imagined that we've lost those children. And what I mean by that, okay, they're under our roof perhaps, but they're not behaving as though they are children. There's a breakdown of confidence. Now, what do we need to do now? We need to use a different approach. So, beginning to manage a conversation with them. So how do we do this? By developing some confidence through never saying anything negative, which might be difficult when the children are not behaving. So what you do is you say a word or two to them when it's safe to do so, when they feel safe, they don't feel threatened, they're not going to respond and fly off the handle. To say something nice to them. And to go out of your way to affirm any positives in them. To go out of you, to appreciate everything. And to not give them a frown all the time, to sometimes give them a smile. Rasulullah, a man came to him from the Bedouins, and the Prophet was kissing one of the children. And he says, "You kiss children? I have this many sons and I've never kissed any of them." And the Prophet said words to the effect that, what can I do if Allah Ta'ala has deprived you of mercy? So to kiss your own children, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would visit Fatima radiyallahu anha, and she would stand and take the Prophet's hand and seat him in her place. So other spaces to sit, she would sit him in her own place to show respect. She would visit Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would rise for her, take her hand, kiss her on the forehead, and seat her in his own place. So as parents, you know, we need to perhaps give more of the compassion, even more when the children become difficult, even more. And when we can talk about something which is safe, and what I mean by that is neither we nor they are going to become irritated. And then that dialogue. You know, 3 words on this point. There's a book which I can recommend to you. It's not an Islamic book, but you may find some wisdom in it, and you can take wisdom when it comes. It's called Crucial Conversations. And it's about this exact point. A conversation becomes crucial, according to the co-authors of this book, when it can result in outcomes which might not be good. Allah grant me tawfiq as well. So basically, 3 situations in the book, which I would summarize the book into. Violence, silence, and dialogue. Violence is when the conversation becomes violent, flying off the handle. Is that a solution? No. Silence, the silent treatment, stop talking. Is that a solution? No, but it may be better than flying off the handle. And the third is dialogue. So re-establishing the broken threads, re-establishing a weak relationship, a weak signal, heart to heart, and then gradually building it up. And when you become friends with your children, then you can begin to become parents as well. And forgive me, don't expect the standards that you had with your own parents, unless you've really worked hard or Allah especially blessed you. Perhaps we were not at the level that our parents were with their parents. So now what do we do? So of course you're doing all the parenting. You're likely doing all the housework. I tell all my students regularly, the boys that I teach, I ask them, do you sometimes load the laundry into the washing machine? Do you sometimes use the vacuum cleaner? Do you ever make a cup of tea? Are you able to iron clothes? Do you do housework? Does your mum allow you into the kitchen? I encourage them. I teach boys, so I encourage them. I encourage them to be good husbands. If I was to give this message to sisters, I'd say the opposite message. Say, you know, be good to your spouses. So the point here is, as parents, yes, I can talk about all the things that the children should do. It's not going to solve the problem. The solution here is a generous dose of love from the parents and lots of dua until you win them over. And then inshallah, when you're on that level, then you can begin to tell them what it's like to be a child and what it's like to be a parent and how each should fulfill the rights of the other. May Allah grant us all pious children. Ji.
There's lots of questions. This is the last one, but the rest we'll answer
inshallah.
Afterwards. There's a general one people have asked. We miss the masjid. What should we do?
We miss the masjid. What should we do? You are blessed, and you should look forward to being under the arsh of Allah on the day of Qiyamah. Let me mention this to you. See, there's two elements to this. One is the fact that we want to go to the masjid and we can't. I thank Allah that I'm sitting here through blessing of my listeners here. You know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned individuals, and the muhaddithin say this is referring to categories of people who will be afforded the shade of the arsh of Allah on the day on which there will be no shade except His shade. In one hadith, 7 mentioned together. سَبْعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا يَظِلُّهُ. There are 7 categories of people, 7 people who will be afforded the shade of the arsh of Allah on the day on which there will be no shade except the shade of the arsh of Allah. And one of them is a person قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ بِالْمَسَاجِدِ, whose heart is suspended in the masajid. Let me be the one to share this hadith with you if you've not heard it before, or reaffirm it in your heart. This is a blessed condition. It's a state of iman where the fish is out of the water and it's jumping about. It needs to get back in. You're out of the masjid. This is your lifeblood and oxygen. You're missing the spirituality. Your heart's in it. Look, Allah sees your heart. He's closer to you than your own heart. So this is a blessed condition. Keep it up. Remember the masjid. Make dua for it and for the masajid that they reopen soon, and make these duas regularly. So this is one aspect of the answer to your question. The other aspect is, what can we do about it? Well, you know, in the circumstances, the fiqhi advice too is that you don't come to the masjid. So remember, just as you used to come to the masjid to please Allah, you are abstaining from coming to the masjid, not because of anybody, but because of Allah as well. Because that's what our deen is telling us in these circumstances, that you follow the rule the advice that you've been given. So inshallah there's reward in that too. And if you were punctual before the lockdown, then the reward will continue for you inshallah. And if you weren't, then let us make a resolution. After lockdown, then we will come even more punctually than we used to, and we will appreciate every minute in the house of Allah. May Allah grant us tawfiq. Ji. Does that bring us to the end today?
Yes.
Right. Well, Allah Ta'ala accept everything that we've said. Allah Ta'ala grant me and you from slipping, and until we meet again, if only virtually, Allah Ta'ala make this a source of blessing for us this coming season. And I request your du'as, and I make dua for you all. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.